Welcome everybody to Know Hour. You guys ready to know a few things?
Oh yeah.
Cool. Who's let's embarrass you. Who's first time here for Know Hour? Yeah. Okay. Got a good chunk of people. All right. Cool. Sweet. Well, we won't make you stand up and embarrass yourself, but that's cool. So, as you probably know, we're going through Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis's great work. So if you're here for Lion and the Witch of the Wardrobe, that's another one. That's downstairs. So we'll do that one later. Let's take a little. Who has a really old book? Let's see if anybody has an older book than, say, Carl. Oh, look at that one. How old's yours? You know what the printing is on that one?
I'm guessing around 1970.
70? Okay, cool. Yeah, that's pretty good. Mine's the 75 printing. We think yours is in the 60s, late 60s?
Well, I don't know. Is this one? I bought this one in 1978, I think.
Oh, that's pretty good.
So,
yours is just like mine. Hey, there you go.
that one.
Okay. Anybody else have a really? Oh, that's a good one. Okay, how old's yours, Butch?
78.
78.
Okay,
Okay.
see, that's
He's probably the same one.
same.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so we got some oldies. We got some antiques.
What do we got?
I have to be careful how I open mine because it'll crack the spine.
78's not old, by the way.
The book is old. Butch is a young buck. Yeah. So, well, you're the bionic man now, Butch. So, right? Well, did everybody get donuts and coffee and all that jazz? If you had not signed up online through the email or whatever, please make sure your name is on that list so we can track you and send you spam. No, I'm just kidding. So we just want to make sure we have a good database so we can, if we have new assignments or information, we want to be able to email you guys and just keep everybody up to date on things. So that's what that's for. Cool. I think that's it. Who doesn't have the book at all yet? Because you know how things are these days with supply chain issues. The books are coming this week, but we do want you guys to get a head start. So who doesn't have a book at all? Okay, you want to pass these out? Keep your hands raised. Tyler's going to, we have the first 3, I think, chapters printed off in the preface. So, you don't share. So homework, we'll explain homework later, but we want you guys to get a head start on the reading. We will have books here this week at some point. They'll show up in the book nook. If you don't know where the book nook is, it's at the very far end of the church. You'll see it on the left side of the sanctuary. There's it's a nook. That's why they call it the book nook. And we'll have C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity there for you to grab. Feel free to throw donations down on that too. But so we're going to do something a little different for those of you that are seasoned Know Hour experts, and that is that we're going to tag team it this time. So we have the great Carl Christensen, an old Bear Creeker classic, very seasoned professional, has been teaching for ever?
Well, in public school, 39 years.
Teaching for 39 years in public school and teaching probably even longer than that, right? Just in various aspects, yeah? So, okay, cool. So Carl has his Master of Science in Wildlife Biology from CSU, and he has a Master of Science in Entomology from Iowa State. So if you guys came to his class last year and he talked about mosquitoes, that's where that came from. That's what you did your dissertation on, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Or thesis.
Or thesis, not dissertation. Thesis, yeah. And then he also has a newly acquired Master of Arts in Science and Religion from Biola. He just finished that last year, so that's pretty exciting. And then we have the great Tyler Traylor. So he has his Bachelor of Science in Theology from CCU, and he is working on this is a fun one. So he's going to school at the London School of Theology. He flies there every week. It's a really long commute.
Personal jet.
It's online. London School of Theology. He is studying his Master of Arts in, check this one out, Aspects and Implications of Biblical Interpretation. That's a mouthful. So he's going to get that one on his certificate when he's done. So, and I'm just some schmuck they found on the street. So, my name's Chuck Hess, associate pastor here. Really glad to have you guys here. Really excited to go over C.S. Lewis Mere Christianity with you guys. the reason why we're doing Mere Christianity is a lot, our theme for the year at church is Christian formation. And I think if we don't know kind of the basics of our own theology, the reasons why we believe what we believe, I think we might be stymied in figuring out how to put some of those basics into practice in our Christian formation, in building our rule of life. So this book should be really formational in helping us understand really the nuts and bolts. Because, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to look around and realize there's a bajillion different denominations in the world, right? Or at least in America. And a lot of the reasons why there's different denominations are, well, if you guys have read the book, C.S. Lewis talks about it. They're sort of the disputable matters, the little things that we fuss about and argue about. But really, that's not what's going to help win the world. Wins lost souls, people who don't know God at all. And so knowing the real basics, the meat and potatoes of Christianity, I think is going to be really key for us in our own formation and also in our own outreach. So that's why we're going to do this these next 12 weeks here. So that's all I got with no further ado. Tyler, do you want to say anything about yourself?
No.
Okay, you'll get to know him in time too. We're going to do it'll be fun as we go here. We're going to do some breakout sessions. You guys are going to have homework, dun, 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 and suddenly half the class leaves. No, it's going to be we're going to really dive into this, and I think it's going to be really fun to do this with you guys. I'm excited. I know these guys are excited. So with no further ado, I give you Carl Christensen.
Woo.
Woo!
Yeah.
Woo! Yeah!
Come on, what's one?
So let's open in a word of prayer. God, we do thank you for this opportunity to gather together today to think about higher things that you have called us to. You have called us into a deep relationship with you, but there are some very foundational things that are going to be really helpful for us to grow in our knowing about you, knowing about Jesus, and then being able to share that with the rest of the world. So we pray, Lord, that your Spirit would be here and guiding and directing our speech and our thoughts, that everything that we do here and accomplish here today would serve to glorify you. And so we ask your blessing on this time now, in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so let me just preface this to say we're off to a little rocky start. Is our recording going there?
Yep.
Okay.
Should be able to double check.
All right.
Yep.
And then this guy's down here is going. So we had, as the three of us kind of sat together, we had all these great imaginations how we're going to get this thing up and running, and of course it never works the way you think it's going to. So for instance, one of our thoughts was that in advance of today, all of you would get your book and read the first 3 chapters. How many did that?
Hey. That's
Okay.
good.
Hey. Okay. We had a few of you. I mean, that was kind of our intent, but that we guessed that wouldn't really work. So we'll take a little bit of a different tack today. The other thing is in our discussions, you really want this to be interactive, not just like a lecture class. But we've got, 55, 60 people attending the class. And so right now our seating is not set up well for that, but we're going to try and do that a little bit today, and we'll just kind of have to turn chairs or something and do that. But we'll see in the future about maybe kind of rearranging the chairs a little bit so that you guys can have the opportunity to kind of break out into small groups and have conversations amongst yourselves. I think that's really, really helpful to be able to express and talk about what you're reading about. It makes it sink deeper into your brain, I think, when you have the ability to talk about it yourself and not just listen to somebody up here talking. So a couple things, hopefully, that you picked up. There was a schedule, our kind of syllabus here. So if you didn't get one, I think there's some copies over there still. And so you'll see that our first day today, what we would like to be covering is the contents of the preface and then the first 3 chapters from book 1. And then the handout that you got, so this was our little additional stumble. We'll get this all figured out here. So we've got kind of like 2 handouts for the price of 1. They're kind of nested here. So the first one says session 1 with today's date on it. But this just has some background information and some questions about the preface. And then the other one inside that, it says session 2. Disregard that. We're going to try and scoot through this as well today. So disregard the session 1 and the date, which is next week's date. This is what we want to cover today. Okay. Then Chuck sent out an email kind of midweek or late last week to everybody who registered for the class. And no surprise, a good chunk of you waited until yesterday to register, which is fine, We love you. But you didn't get that email. And in this email, there is a link to what's called the Google Classroom. And in the Google Classroom, all of these documents will be posted. So for instance, as we speak, the document, the lesson for next week is posted on there. So on here, on the schedule, next week we want to look at chapters 4 and 5 from book 1. And the questions for that are on the Google Classroom. So they're sitting there waiting for you. Okay?
We'll also post the videos too.
Yeah, we'll try and post. We'll get these videos posted on there as well. We actually do have some people who are participating with us online. We're trying to be accommodating because we know we've got some people who are stuck at home with the Omicron and all that. So anyway, we've got a lot of moving parts here, and the 3 of us are all working at separate jobs and trying to make all this get afloat. So bear with us here a little bit. All right, so we want to dive in a little bit, and as Chuck already mentioned in the preface, when we're thinking about mere Christianity, what is the kind of broad stroke of this book? And it's interesting because Lewis talks about how the meanings of words have changed and sometimes they become meaningless. And even the word mere has kind of changed since Lewis wrote the book. To me, mere has a little bit of a pejorative tone to it. Yes, especially when we think about, so we're in this culture right now where we're really fascinated with superheroes and all that, right? And so we would say about the superhero, well, he's no mere mortal, right? And that's pejorative, isn't it? Well, you're something less if you're mere. But this is not what mere means. Does anyone know what the word mere actually means?
More basic.
Okay, kind of basic.
Fundamental.
Fundamental, yeah. It is what it is. Nothing more, nothing less is really what the word mere means. And so this is what C.S. Lewis is trying to get at. And in the preface, he uses something of an analogy. And of course, it's an analogy, so if you take it too far, it'll break down, right? But we think of Christianity as a house. Everyone enters the house. And all of the different branches of Christianity could be represented as rooms of the house. And each of us will find our way into one of these rooms to reside in. But in the room, to get to all the rooms in the house, there is a hallway. A hallway that is central to Christianity, and from which you get to all the other rooms. That's what we're looking at here. Okay? There are these, very often, secondary issues that come up, and some of them are just simply preferential. What kind of worship music do you want to do? Are we going to be doing Gregorian chants, or are we going to do something with guitars and drums and things like that? And does that have any bearing on your salvation and your eternal existence with the eternal God? No. But we make, that's our expression of what we believe in, but it's not central to our faith. And so what C.S. Lewis is going to try and do in this book is pull us all back to what are those central things of our belief that we hold on to, and the things that really are the calling to God's creation to come together into relationship with Him. It's not, are we going to have people fall under submission to the God of the universe because we have a discussion about old earth or young earth creationism? Don't think so. Don't think so. No, those are not burning matters that pertain to your relationship with God. But these are, and that's what we're going to be taking a look at. So, on the first handout here, it has this, I wrote up just kind of like a really brief summary of the life of C.S. Lewis. And a lot of you are probably aware that C.S. Lewis was not always a Christian. He started as a Christian. He was in the British Commonwealth. He's actually an Irishman. And as a young boy, they attended Anglican church. And his mother fell ill. And I believe she had cancer. And he prayed greatly for her that she would be saved, that she would be spared from this illness. And she did not. She died. And that was very troubling to a young C.S. Lewis. And so when his dad was not the most fatherly guy, and he got shipped off to boarding school, left to ruminate upon these things on his own. And it drove him into a point of despair, and he became an atheist. He said, how could there be a God in the world who would allow my mother to die? And it's a fair question. And so for a long, long time, he became an atheist. And then, so finally, he ends up going to school at Oxford. And at Oxford, he starts engaging with a group of guys. And they start talking about spiritual things. And there were two guys in particular in his life. One was J.R.R. Tolkien, which many of you are familiar with, and another guy named Hugo Dyson. And together they had a lot of conversations about the way the world really is. And through these conversations, C.S. Lewis was moved away from an atheistic understanding first to a position of theism, and recognized that there is a rational basis for theism. And then ultimately, he came back around to Christianity. So in this book, Mere Christianity, actually what you're going to get a little sampling of is some of that road that Lewis took in coming back to Christianity. And one of the things that was most pressing on C.S. Lewis in bringing him back to faith was this idea of the moral law as evidence for the existence of God. Now, there are a number of arguments that we have for the existence of God. We have the teleological argument, which is also referred to as the design argument, or the cosmological argument. And there's Anselm's argument, and there's a number of them. But the one that was most compelling for Lewis was what we call the moral argument. And that's actually where Mere Christianity begins. So we have this sense of morality, and what for a long time was referred to as the natural law. Now today, if we talk about natural law, what are we thinking about? Huh? Okay, scientific laws. We're thinking about Newton's laws of motion and gravity and thermodynamics. And And this is not the kind of law that was referred to as natural law before. So Lewis qualifies it and says that it's the law of human nature. Okay, but that there is this law-like thing to it. Now, in our modern era, there has been this tendency to explain away this whole aspect of human nature. Where does human nature come from? Okay? So here's what I want you to do. See if we can get any traction off of this so it's not just me talking up here. Turn and form a small group and so prove me wrong. This idea that comes out of our culture right now, what we think of as human nature, derives, it's just a matter of instinct. It's kind of built into our biology. Okay? So I'll give you a few minutes. So turn in a small conversation. If someone were to approach you with that idea, how would you respond? What would you say to them?
Okay, Hi, I'm Trish. I'm Jamie.
So long as like God, it's not near natural. I mean, like we're not just built this master, whether it's through evolution or not.
To me, it would be a different sensor, and then I would just kind of yeah.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Love each other well. There's certain there's like no utilitarian value. Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, and one of the problems too with it, if you do try to justify that biologically, what ends up happening is you end up saying, well, there's a type of person that is weaker and dies, and then there's a type of person that's stronger and lives. And you're willing to kill the weaker so that the stronger can live. And it ends up actually devaluing you create class systems of evolutionary. I mean, this has happened in history where there are classes of people based off of these evolutionary theories that you need to kill so that yeah.
And I think there is. But I think that that's, I see it, and I don't know how it evolution works that extent, maybe by survival incidents, but from God's perspective, it happened in the fall.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, if you read any of the history stuff for people and tribal history, they don't want their people being killed, but if another tribe
Yeah.
outside of your people group, it's not necessarily a bad thing to kill
Okay, I'll give you one more minute to wrap up your conversation.
I just feel that, like, really, that assumes materialism. Like, that's the whole presupposition. And it just doesn't, when you do that, you lose the ability to have, like, complex systems that actually have meaning. You lose the ability to have transcendent meaning. Because everything has been, yeah. And so, there is no reason, because it's just matter. I'm just a meat block that has weird hallucinations all the time. You know? Like they, yeah. Totally subjective, yeah. There's no objective transcendent meaning. Yeah.
All right, let me pull us back to center here.
But as far as deriving
All right, do we get it figured out? So now we all know that your human nature is just a product of evolution. It's just the wiring in your head, and there's no reason to go any further with this, right? Throw it away. Or do we have an answer? Is this something to be objected to here? Help me out.
yes.
As an absolute statement, it's wrong.
How do I know? What evidence do we see that would cause us to reject that idea? Go ahead. What's your name?
Hilda.
Hilda. Okay.
With biological evolution, random chance went out when Watson and Crick discovered DNA, and there's code in DNA.
Okay.
That's my answer.
Okay. All right. All right. So I'm a biology teacher,
Yeah.
so I'm with you on that.
Could you repeat what you said, please?
So this whole idea of coding, if we're going to tie everything to the coding that's in your DNA, we have a really hard time explaining a lot of things in evolution when we're talking about trying to explain everything by random mutations. We're just going to do a random mutation of base pairs, and we're going to get these certain traits. Really hard to explain that away. And I talk with my students about that a lot. Okay? So I'm with you there. What else?
Well, doesn't evolution seems to be able to explain mechanistic things like a flight or fright response, but it can't explain meaning or purpose kinds of things.
True. But are we really about meaning and purpose when we're thinking about human nature and how we interact with each other? Because bottom line, evolution says what? We are fundamentally functioning in a way that causes us to survive better and reproduce and be more likely to reproduce. And so we've just learned somehow, and it's become coded in our DNA, that if we act these certain ways, we are more likely to survive and reproduce better. And that's all there is to our moralistic behavior. Yeah.
Something that we talked about was certain behaviors that a lot of human beings do and exhibit that don't have any bearing on survival or reproduction. So one of those things we brought up was art. Like art doesn't functionally have any purpose to our survival or reproduction, other than perhaps like, oh wow, that person made a really beautiful painting. I'm going to go be with them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. But let me kind of, and I don't disagree with that in terms of it having an evolutionary explanation, but I wanted us to do is focus in on this idea of moral law. What we're understanding about what is right and what is wrong. And I don't think art necessarily falls in that category. So how do we derive these rights and wrongs that we feel like we've got a sense for? Yeah.
Well, am I wrong? Somebody told me once that Charles Darwin even said that you cannot evolve a consciousness, that it had to come from somewhere else. Is that right?
Well, yeah. Human consciousness has probably been the biggest bugaboo for evolution, but that's not where we're at.
Oh, it's not.
No, we're at just simply this behavioral level of what is right, what is wrong.
But doesn't that come from our consciousness? Doesn't that determine what we think is right and what's wrong?
Well, all animals behave in a certain way, right? But they don't necessarily have consciousness that defines and directs their behavior. It's just they're hardwired for it.
Which means that animals can't have a concept of right and wrong without a consciousness. I think that's what she's getting at.
Okay, well,
Right.
So is it really your self-awareness that gives you that sense of wrong, or is there something that's standing outside of you? Well, we'll come to that in just a minute. Okay, yes.
I think what you're getting at is that there are certain like rules of biological evolution that seem to stand in contrast to our understanding of morality. Like there are certain behaviors that we have that don't serve any purpose in regarding biological evolution, but that we know to be right. In terms of things even like compassion or whatever, where it's like, okay, that doesn't serve any biological or evolutionary purpose in biology, but we have it in the understanding.
Okay, all right.
Carl, what about societal pressure?
Well, so societal pressure says we function well as a society, so let's all get along together, right? That's what you're talking about.
Or it demands that I behave in a certain way, otherwise I would be ostracized or cast out or
Okay,
killed.
but how did you come about this the right way? How do we manage to formulate this right wayness? And we can't say to benefit society because then we're just talking about the same thing.
But I'm talking about the pressure of a society on me as an individual, because there are certain standards of behavior in every society that is expected. And if we don't meet those standards of behavior, then there are consequences.
Okay, well you're actually kind of jumping ahead just a little bit here.
Oops, sorry.
That's okay, that's okay. So let's just think about this in terms of, just your basic biology, the different impulses that we have to function and to operate, okay? And what Lewis talks about is that we actually have a bunch of competing impulses that we're dealing with. And some are stronger than others, okay? So for instance, we would tend to say that my impulse or my instinct for self-preservation is very, very strong. Okay? But then we have other ones that are weaker. And so you guys were talking a little bit about this, about sacrificial kind of things, right? Maybe what we think about is like altruism, where I'm going to put my self-preservation aside and rescue somebody. Okay, I'll give you a good example. A number of years ago, there was a guy who was out walking his dog by one of the lakes here in Denver, and the dog went out on the lake, and it was thin, and it fell through the ice. And so what did he do? Well, he just stood there, said, "Nice knowing you, dog." Because he understood what the risks were for him. The dog's smaller than him. If he was going to go try and go out on the lake, he would be in his worse straits than the dog. And they both died. So he just stood on the edge of the lake and it's like, "Nice knowing you." You guys happy with that? Okay, we got one strong soul here. Well, okay. So there were other people who were walking by who were saying like, "Aren't you going to do something? Aren't you going to do something?" And so somebody finally did call the fire department or something, and somebody did come out and actually rescued the dog. And this guy got charged for neglect. Okay? But my point is, what? So this guy was following his stronger impulse. He was following that self-preservation, as opposed to an impulse to go save a dog. Let's weigh this out here. Me or my dog, you know. But we have a sense as people that he ought to have set aside that stronger impulse and follow the weaker impulse, right? So here's the thing, though. So you've got these two impulses, one that's really strong about keeping myself alive, but we've got something outside of those two impulses that's adjudicating the two. And saying, you ought to do the weaker impulse. You should follow that one and put the stronger impulse aside. Now, is that always going to be the case? Will we always follow that weaker impulse? Should we always follow that weaker? Not always. Okay? So he talks about this whole idea that we're playing these impulses, and there is something outside of our list of impulses that navigates that. And it's something outside of ourselves. Because if it was only internal, then we'd always just follow that stronger impulse. That stronger impulse would always win out. Okay, so then we're going to get to Nita's question then. So is this sense of right and wrong, is this simply coming just from society? It's just something that you have been taught. So I'm going to have you turn and talk about this now. Prove me wrong. Okay. Human nature comes from society or what you've been, whoops, I'm running out of room here. What you've been taught. Is that how we explain right and wrong? So turn in your groups and chat about that for a few minutes.
Would it be helpful to, instead of calling it human nature, say human morality?
You can use morality, your sense of right and wrong. But that's what human nature is the law of human nature is Our sense of morality, our sense of right and wrong.
I don't know about that. A lot of philosophers have distinguished between human nature and moral law,
It's relevant.
and that they're actually not the same.
I think
The morality is a component of human nature, or
The imposition on human nature.
okay?
most people aren't.
I mean, of course, it depends on the philosopher, but yeah, they,
Full evolution.
a lot of them look at it more as human nature like your morality is.
Whereas it
Okay.
used to be.
Well, yeah, and so we're going to actually object to that. That
Well,
our morality and our true human nature is rooted in sin.
And see, and that's why, well, yes, and that's why you actually need a conscience to acknowledge it, because that conscience is given to us by God when we read like
Right.
in Adam.
Right.
So that's why there is the only way we can have any concept of morality is because of God.
Right. Well, no,
Because
now,
otherwise-
I'm not disagreeing with you.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do is we're going to push against like a humanist or atheistic type of position that says, well, we can just explain it because of your culture or your background or something like that. And there's really no God to it.
Because there's certain characteristics. Wildly, if you look at their wildly foundation of that, 3 or 4 things that all there's a good time. One of those
72 including us.
Huh?
72 including us.
Oh,
So let's see what the
okay.
depreciation rate is later, but you know, should be good. Cool. What are we talking about?
And it's
I
towards,
missed it.
for them, it's towards like.
So we're just talking about, okay,
God. I
so
would rather
we kind of dispelled the idea that morality is just
Yeah.
built-in biology, it's just our instincts. So now we're thinking about, okay, well, it just comes from what you were taught, where you grew up, your culture, your background,
Society, parents.
your sense of right and wrong is what your parents told you, and that's where right and wrong is coming from.
Yeah, I heard you say that, but what was that question? I went down right before.
Just this,
Oh, is this the, oh, this
prove me wrong, that our human nature, our sense of right and wrong, just comes from your society and where you are.
What if there's, no matter where you grew up, where you're from, or what the society was, there were certain things that you saw and something else. That's right. There's something that grows up. I think that's a good answer. I don't think I didn't really check the sources on it.
Well, yeah, I think like those examples of like family or stealing or murder, each of those are like practical examples, but I think if you like even abstract out further and say like, for instance, the general idea that there is a that just honestly, like the general abstract principle that there's a way to live, and if I don't do that, I'm doing something wrong. That in and of itself is actually a representation of a natural law, and that emanates out and it reflects itself in a lot of different ways. So there's a right way to interact with property, and a right way to interact with marriage, and a right way to interact with sex, or whatever. But the fact that we all tend to agree that there's a right way to do something, and it can be broken, you know, that in and of itself is actually a moral statement. And that's not something that's just culturally conditioned.
I'll adjust it. Well, so the big question is our
No.
That's like,
Sure.
It doesn't drive to something.
This whole point is broken now.
Yeah.
That would show that really is not derived just from society.
Well, at the end of the day, it's just an overemphasis on the human's role in this process. So, like, the idea that morality is socially constructed ultimately just allows, and it's used, frankly, towards the end.
All right, give you guys a minute to
oftentimes we say it's
figure
socially
this question
constructed so
out.
that we can deconstruct it. Because if it's socially constructed, well then I have power to change that. Because I'm a part of the
Here,
society.
say something again?
Yeah, I think we got it.
Oh, I do here.
Yeah. This clip doesn't work,
Exactly.
so I had to unbutton a button and kind of wedge it in there. So we'll see if that works.
We'll duct tape it together.
All right, duct tape will be the answer.
We did well.
All right, so you have it all. We all know now that morality simply derives from what my parents told me, right?
That's what happened.
That's what happened.
Now we understand.
So what do we think about that? Do we have some reason to think that our sense of right and wrong is coming from something other than just what I've been taught?
Yes.
What do we, yeah.
Well, I mean, one of the parts of the conversation is that society itself was a human construct. Like, it didn't exist first, we did. So it's kind of like saying, okay, we've allowed something we've created to dictate, you know, us, our natures or whatever, when it was our nature itself that created it.
Right, and so we have that kind of infinite regress kind of problem. Right, okay, well, so if your parents told you what was right and wrong, who told them?
Right.
And who told them? And we have a hard time kind of deriving that. So there's that aspect. What else? Any other thoughts?
Well, if it were only evolution that dictated it, then the common good could be justified to eliminate or minimize the number of births that would be problematic for society, a weight on society, and minimize those that are at the end of life and are a burden on society, so that more resources could go to others and for the common good, so that more people could prosper by eliminating those that are sucking up resources.
Well, I agree, and that kind of comes back to the first question.
Yeah.
You know, that we do a bunch of things in our human society that are very counterintuitive just to pure survival. You know, it was Richard Dawkins who said that it would be immoral for a person who knows that their child is Down syndrome to not abort it. He got a lot of pushback on that because most of society has a strong sense that that is not right thinking, okay? But here we're thinking about, okay, morality just coming from your upbringing or how you were taught, and that's where it comes from. So any other thoughts on that? Yeah, Bob?
Jeff Foxworthy was right.
What did Jeff Foxworthy say? Because he's quite the philosopher.
Yeah, he is.
I don't think I could repeat it in here.
You might be a redneck.
You might be a redneck.
He was right in the wrong way.
If that was true, if human nature derives from what you've been taught, then identical twins, you would never have one that was a serial killer and one that was a theological professor. Because they would have both been taught the same thing.
Okay.
And they would have both had the same DNA.
All right. So the whole idea that we actually have a way of intentionally violating that which we've been taught, so it's not instilled in us necessarily.
Right.
Okay, and this is something that Lewis does bring out, that the human law, the natural law, is not like our scientific laws, which are actually just descriptions. That's all they are. They're not explaining why things work. They're just saying this is what happens every time. And that's not true for moral law. But we have a moral law that stands, I would say, outside of us, and then we intentionally decide whether we're going to conform to that or not. Okay, Skip.
So I think going back to your question here and the drowning dog analogy, I think you can see that society is going to change some of our behavior, change our impulse to go for that base new force and some of those lesser impulses that you stated they were. The outcome for this guy was he gets his dog back. He probably doesn't have to go through any of that grief thing, but he's got a lot of grief now with legal problems, and he's arrested for letting it, for abusing his dog.
Yep.
If he were to find himself in that situation again, a similar situation, he might say, "Boy, I'm way in losing a dog, I'm way in getting in a bunch of legal grief." Society is going to be one of the big impactors in how he reacts in the future in a similar situation. Had his dog drowned, he might have dealt with some grief and might have come to some spiritual fork in the road that changes his behavior.
Right, and so here's what you're doing, and we all do this. This is the descriptive side of things. This is how it works. What that doesn't answer for us is, where did that sense of right and wrong come from in the first place?
So I was gonna touch on, if this statement is true, then there would be, if this is true, then there's no base foundational right and wrong, right? It's simply something that's been created in order to serve society, right? And whatever that means. And serve probably means good. If that's the case, then there's no basis. Lewis, he talked about this. Then there's no way to say which society has the best way of doing things, right? The best way.
Right. We'll just all agree that we all function on some kind of sense of morality. You do your way and I'll do my way, and we'll just keep out of each other's business, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to speak to that, I mean, I know Lewis talks about how if that were the case, first off, you'd have a bunch of societies that'll have completely different moral codes, but he's like, there's more common than there is not. And then there's an implication in this, which is, well, if society was dictating morality, then we'd always be working in an upward trajectory, but, there are plenty of times in history where we demonstrate that's not the case, where where a society takes a dip in its moral perspectives, and we go, okay, maybe we shouldn't have done that, you know, and he uses witchcraft, I think, is the example, right? It's like,
Yes, yeah.
once upon a time we thought it was okay to do that, but you know, now we objectively understand probably not.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, several things with that. So first of all, one thing is there's a little bit of a genetic fallacy here, where genetic fallacy is we're saying, well, this is wrong because of where it came from. Okay. So we're disparaging the sense of morality because you were taught that. But realize that I think we all understand we are taught, either from our parents or our society kind of teaches us and helps us guide our behavior. However, just because you were taught that doesn't mean that's where it came from. So Lewis, I think, rightly uses the example of mathematics. Okay? We're all taught mathematics. Would you know mathematics if you were born on a desert island all by yourself?
Definitely.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'd have all the Pythagorean theorem all figured out. So, but here's the thing we understand about mathematics. Mathematics is this really interesting thing about our universe. Things like numbers don't actually exist. Except where? In your mind. They don't physically exist. And we'd say that generally about mathematics. Okay? Mathematics is a thing in our universe that existed long before humans ever came into existence. We didn't make it up. All we mostly do with mathematics is discover what is there. But we still teach it, right? So just because we teach it doesn't mean we made it up. Does that make sense? And so he's saying the same thing is true with our sense of right and wrong. Yes, we teach right and wrong, but that's not where it came from. Okay? The other thing is you talked about, okay, we think we have this upward trajectory. Well, whoa, wait a minute. If we had this right sense of right and wrong, there would be no such thing as progress in our morality. Why would we bother having our legislatures in Washington making new laws? Now we still wonder why. No. Oh, yeah. But it's on video now. Oh, I'm in trouble. Okay. But if we didn't have a sense that what we're doing now couldn't be done better, right? Why would we have legislators? But the fact is we do. We do have a sense that we could do better. Well, how do we get that idea that we could do better? Well, because there's something that stands outside of our current existing moral code that says there's something better than that. You see? And that didn't come from us. And, of course, Lewis, when he's writing this is in the midst of World War II, and we're fighting against the Nazis. We somehow have this idea that what the Nazis are doing is not good, it's not acceptable, and we should fight against it, right? But if morality just comes from where you're at, then we should have just minded our own business and let the Nazis do whatever the Nazis did. But we're not comfortable with that idea, right? So there is something that's standing outside us. Now, Lewis is very careful. He's not saying, I'm not trying to tell you what the correct morality is. That's not what we're doing here. What he wants us to see is we all have some differing moral standards, but we can look at some other people's moral standards and think that some aspects of ours are better. Well, how did you get that idea? Well, because there's something that stands outside of all of those moral standards that helps us adjudicate which one that some are better than others. And we don't have to figure out which one's the best one. We just have to understand that there's something outside those that makes us understand that it's not coming from us, right? And then part of it has to do with this, and this is another thing you were mentioning about the witchcraft. some of those changes in morality have to do with change in facts. And it's not changing morality, it's changing facts. So he uses the idea of witchcraft. Okay, now if people really could do the things they thought witches could do, change the weather, destroy your crops, kill people, what should we do with those people? Burn them!
Burn the witch.
Burn the witch! Shouldn't we? Unless she floats, right? Unless she floats. Well, then she's a witch. Sorry for the Monty Python reference there. So when they were burning witches, it was because of the facts they thought they had, right? And so the whole idea that we should deal severely with people who are harming other people, that hasn't changed. That's still our sense of morality. What changed was the facts of the matter. Okay, there really aren't witches who can do these things, right? Yeah, real quick.
I think even in Lewis's time, though, and contemporaneous, when he's writing this, their facts and understanding of why the Nazis were bad people had less of an understanding of what the Nazis were doing then than we have now.
Oh.
They were obviously bad people, but they had no idea of the extermination of the Jews during the war. They had no idea how bad the Nazis were.
Yeah.
But they still had a moral duty to fight what they perceived as being an evil regime.
Well, I mean, they definitely saw the totalitarianism within the regime, and they knew that totalitarianism is a bad thing. They did know some things about discrimination that was going on in the country, particularly against Jews. But you're right, they did not know the depth and darkness of what they were doing. But even with that, we fought against it, right? Okay. So Lewis really gives us a lot of evidence here then that this whole thing, this whole idea of moral law is really derived from something outside ourselves, something transcendent. Now we're not getting just yet what that is. We'll come to that later. But it's one of the things that we have to have an understanding of out in the hallway that serves as the basis of everything that is Christian. That we understand, first of all, that there is this, for instance, sense of oughtness about morality. And we don't consistently follow that oughtness. Those are kind of the two things that we move forward from in terms of our Christianity, because we've got some important questions to answer. First is, if the moral law is something that is residing outside of ourselves, who is the moral lawgiver? Second is we understand we don't conform to that moral law that's standing outside and pressing on us. And Dr. Coleman was mentioning about this, that we have this sense of guilt that presses on us, right? Even when I'm in quiet and I do something, I have bad thoughts, or I do something inappropriate, and I don't think anyone's watching, I still have this sense of guilt that weighs on me. I'm being judged, right? We have that sense of that. And so we have the sense of judgment. And what are we to do about that? That we've got a moral lawgiver that exists beyond us, and we have a sense that I've done wrong and there's a consequence to that, and how are we going to deal with that? Okay? So that's what moved Lewis, at least in a big way, in moving from being an atheist to being a theist. This really, really strong sense of the moral law that cannot be explained from humans alone, from nature alone. So, all right. So your homework then, one, if you haven't read the first 3 chapters, read them. Catch up here. And I will tell you, Lewis, if you've never read Lewis before, Don't be surprised if you get done reading a page and you get to the bottom of the page and go, and what did he just say? I think I need to. Don't be put off by that. When the first time I read this, I did that many times and had to go back and let me read that again. Okay. But and part of it is that what Lewis writes is very dense in his thinking. So read through chapter 3, and then next week we're going to tackle chapters 4 and 5 from book 1.
Perfect. Cool.
All right.
All right, let's give it up for Carl. Cool. All right, who did not get, because I know we were a little short, who did not get the questions? Anybody not get them? And then last call. Okay, here we go. Okay. Anybody else? Last call. Tyler, you want to walk around here?
Sure.
And then anybody not get the chapters that doesn't have a book? Okay. Here we go. Here, Tyler, I'll give you these. Cool. This is the code for if you're techie and you download the Google Classroom app on your phone. That's the code to get in. If you're not techie, that's okay. We're going to send an email out with more information about that. Did everybody, if you haven't signed up on this sign-up form, or either A, you hadn't signed up through the email, or you didn't sign up here, please do so before you leave today. And that's it.
All right.
Cool. Thank you, guys.
Close this in a word of prayer.
Let's close this out here, and then we'll get on down there to Sanctuary and get ready for worship. Let's pray. God, thanks so much for today. Thank you for Carl teaching us. Thank you for C.S. Lewis teaching us. God, help us to think about these really basic things, God. We know that in order to win the world, we can't always just, Bible thump. We can't just necessarily show them scriptures. We have to prove our faith, God, and that is built in, God. We know that Romans 1 talks about that. Romans 1 through 3, God, that Paul talks about how it's built into our universe and our society and in our souls, God, that it is built into us, that you are there. The image of God is there, and that we have it built in, and we long to be one with you. Help us to understand that so that we can then share that with others who do not know you, God. Help us to dive deep into this book and take very seriously this content so we can be better Christians, better lovers of God, better lovers of people, God. We love you. We need you, and pray this all in your son's name. Amen. Cool. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. This will be right at the front if you have not signed in. Yep.